right, let's dive in. This is the Homegrown Podcast, and I'm Shawn Collins, and we're here to get real about Webster and our surrounding area. No fluff, no spin, just an honest look at our community. So before we get into the meat of things, let me give you a bit of background on who I am and why you might be seeing me behind the microphone. My name is Shawn Collins. I'm a lifelong resident of Webster, and I've seen this town change in ways that are both good and challenging over the years. My career has taken me through some very interesting paths in public service, most recently as the executive director of the Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission. And yeah, that job was as interesting as it sounds. Before that, I had roles like assistant treasurer and director of policy in the state treasurer's office, and I was a chief of staff and general counsel to our former state senator, Richard Moore. These days, I run the Homegrown Consulting Group, which I founded in 2024. The goal of that entity is really to help entrepreneurs, businesses, and others navigate a very complex world of regulations, especially in heavily regulated industries like cannabis, alcohol, etc. But our mission goes beyond that. We want to be advocates for small businesses, organizations, and individuals across various sectors. Now, you might be wondering, Shawn, with all that background, why the hell are you starting a podcast? Well, it ties directly into why I started the Homegrown Consulting Group in the first place. I believe in the power of local community, and I've seen firsthand how disconnected we've become from what's happening in our own backyard. You know, it's kind of ironic. We're living in the most connected time in human history, but somehow we've never been more disconnected from each other, especially right here in our own community. We have all of this technology at our fingertips, but instead of bringing us together, it often drives us apart. Think about it. How many times have you seen a Facebook thread about a local issue that devolves into a shouting match? People hurling insults at each other over the internet, often without even knowing the person they're arguing with. We're quick to judge. We're quick to anger. And sometimes we're slow to listen and understand. Let's be honest. Most of the time, we're not even working with all the facts. We read a headline, maybe skim an article, and suddenly, and I've done this, we're experts on complex local issues, international issues. We form our opinions in these echo chambers, surrounded by people who think just like us. It's comfortable, sure, but it's not helping us grow as a community. This self-segregation, this yelling into the void of the internet, it's tearing at the fabric of our communities. We're losing the ability to have real face-to-face conversations about issues that matter. We're forgetting how to disagree respectfully and how to find common ground. I'll give you an example. A few months back, I was watching Facebook, and there was this heated debate about a proposed development around the lake. People were going at each other, throwing around accusations, making wild claims. Here's the thing. I actually looked into it a little bit. I talked to folks on both sides of this issue. They had more in common than they realized. They all just cared deeply about their community. They just had different ideas about how to possibly move forward. That's the kind of disconnect I'm dealing with and I'm seeing. And it's not unique to Webster. It's happening everywhere, all over the country. We're losing the ability to see the humanity in those who disagree with us. And that's a problem, because the challenges we face as a community aren't going to be solved on Facebook. That's a big part of why I started this podcast. I'm not naive to think that we're going to solve all these problems. I think we can at least provide a different tone, though, a different approach, one that's maybe more productive, more focused on understanding than on being right. Here's what we're going to do. Every week or every so often, don't count me every week, we're going to dive deep into local issues and talk to someone that's making a difference here in our community, like State Representative Joe McKenna today. We're not just going to scratch the surface, though. We're going to talk to people. We're going to take the time to really listen and understand these issues from every angle. We're going to ask tough questions, sure, but we're going to listen, really listen to answers. And when we talk about controversial topics, because let's face it, we should and we have to, we're going to do it in a way that promotes understanding, not division. We're going to remember that behind every opinion is a person, a neighbor, someone who cares about this community just as much as I do, as you do, as we all do. I want this place to be where we can have conversations that we used to have at local diners or town halls, where we can disagree without being disagreeable, where we can learn from each other, challenge our own assumptions, and maybe, just maybe, find common ground. Because here's the thing. The issues that face our community are way too important for us to keep shouting past each other. Whether it's the future of the lake, the challenges of a local business, or the ongoing struggle with substance abuse, these are complex issues that require a thoughtful, nuanced discussion. Take local businesses, for example. We have businesses that have been serving this community for over a century. They've weathered economic ups and downs, changing consumer habits, and now they're facing all of these new challenges in a digital age. Their story and the stories of all of our local businesses are part of our community story. So it's worth understanding. It's worth talking about. Or consider the lake. It's not just a beautiful natural resource. It's part of our economy. It's part of our identity. But it's facing some environmental challenges that we need to address. That's going to require cooperation. It's going to require understanding and possibly some tough decisions. So we need to be able to have those conversations in a productive way. And that's what you can expect from this podcast, the Homegrown Podcast. Real conversations about real issues, no yelling, no name calling, just honest dialogue. We're going to talk to local officials, business owners, community leaders, and everyday residents. We're going to dig into the history of our area, explore current challenges, and look toward the future. But we're not just going to focus on businesses. We'll talk to people behind charitable entities, learning about the vital work that they do in our community. We'll discuss the efforts to preserve and promote our local history with the folks of the Slater Museum. We'll explore the challenges and triumphs of our local schools, our local public services, and our community organizations. And here's where you come in. This podcast isn't just about me talking at you. It's about all of us engaging in a community-wide conversation. So if you've got a perspective to share, a question to ask, or a topic you think we should cover, let us know. All the contact info will be in our show notes. Maybe you've got a great idea for improving downtown. Maybe you're concerned about a local issue that's not getting enough attention. Maybe you want to share a bit of history that you think more people should know about. Whatever it is, I want to hear from you. This podcast is about all of us, our shared community, our shared challenges, and hopefully our shared future. Look, I know changing the tone of our local discourse is not an easy thing. We've all gotten really comfortable, again, myself included, in our own bubbles. But I believe it's worth trying, because when we start really listening to each other, when we start seeking to understand rather than just be heard, that's when progress is possible. So you might have lived here your whole life, or you could be new to this area. Whether you consider yourself a liberal, a conservative, or probably somewhere in between, this podcast is still for you. It's for anyone who cares about the community and wants to see it thrive. This is the Homegrown Podcast. Let's get to know our home and each other a little better. And so, to kick things off, I want to introduce and thank especially our State Representative Joe McKenna. Joe, thanks for being here. Really glad actually that you're the first guest for something like this. So you were elected to your seat in 2014, took office in 2015. And I should note for our listeners here, Representative McKenna and I have known each other for a bit of time. We actually sort of worked alongside or nearby each other. When I was working in the state Senate, you were working in the state House of Representatives for then Representative Durant and now Senator Durant. And so through that exercise, I got to know you a little bit from your period as a staff member, but have been really impressed and grateful for your service since you were elected. And obviously, congratulations on recently being sworn in again. But I guess maybe to start, and again, to sort of meet this tone, what is it that maybe drew you to politics in the first place? And, I think just what is your story and how do people get to know you personally, not just as the politician, but as Joe McKenna?
Yeah, I appreciate it. And it's hard to believe it's been 10 years that I've been sworn in. And as you said, we worked together back in the day. I was a staff member for Peter Durant. And I have told this a couple times, and I'll deny it if anyone from our former colleague Steve Brewer's office hears, but Peter's office overlapped two Senate districts, Steve Brewer's and Dick Moore's. And I always said I loved working with you and with Senator Moore's office because you guys dealt with us. You worked with us. You talked to us. Even though Peter had upset a Democrat as a Republican and your office was a Democrat Senate office, you never held that against us. And we always had a great collaboration on the other side of the district. And there may have been personality histories that played into it, but there wasn't always the same collaborative spirit with Senator Brewer's office. So I did always appreciate that. My background is I grew up in Charlton, so I have always been a Central Mass kid. Not necessarily a Webster guy, but I grew up in Charlton, graduated from Shepherd Hill in 2006, went on to business school and graduated from Bentley University in 2010, which at that time, there was still kind of a rough job economy. So I had been promised a job selling life insurance as a financial advisor coming out of school. And let me tell you, a fully commission-based job hawking life insurance when you're 21 years old and don't know, your elbow from your toe is not a good way to make a living. So I didn't really enjoy that all too much. And interestingly enough, my best friend's mom was running for the same seat that Peter Durant ended up winning. It was a really fascinating situation in political history where Peter won his original race against the incumbent Geraldo Alicia by like 3 or 4 votes or something. They went to a recount, and the result of the recount was that it was a 1-vote margin, but the judge ruled that 1 vote was within the margin of error of the likelihood of miscalculation or some nonsense, and so determined that the whole race had to go to a runoff. So basically threw out the results and said, we got to start this over.
Actually, now that you mentioned that, I worked on that recount. Not on your side. But I remember that case distinctly because it was basically, how do you determine voter intent?
Yeah.
And it was like, because if folks have voted, and hopefully you have, you fill in the bubble, and some people fill it in very carefully, and other folks just sort of poke it. And so if there was just a smudge on a dot, the machine might read it, or they might fill in the oval. And so there were a couple of votes and they hand counted every single ballot, which, we don't often thank our public servants enough, but folks working in town clerk's office across your district deserve a lot of credit for the way that they run their elections. And that's one of the reasons why, is that out of thousands and thousands of votes cast, they can tell you the winner in a matter of minutes nowadays.
Yeah.
But I did work that recount, and that was a fun experience. It was a good civics lessons for me, that's for sure.
Oh, it's very, very interesting. So the interesting part was I had no skin in the game. I didn't know any of them. I didn't even know there was a race going on, to be completely honest with you. But my best friend's mom, when it went to a runoff, said, what the hell, I'll throw my name in the ring. So there were 3 completely new candidates that hadn't been involved in the original race that got involved in the runoff. So what had been a standard challenger versus incumbent was now a 5-way race. And so me being very unhappy selling life insurance, I said, I'll help you. I'll drive you around, throw some lawn signs in. I'll just be kind of your campaign intern, for lack of anything more interesting in my life to do, not because I had a passion for politics. She ended up having a decent little run and kind of floated the idea of me working for her if she won. And then she lost, and I was devastated. And I'm like, I got to go back and sell life insurance.
Yeah.
But she ended up introducing me to Peter, who she got along with very, very well over the course of the campaign. And so I ended up volunteering and helping him in much the same capacity. Your typical campaign volunteer, cold calling people, reminding them of the election, driving around, putting up lawn signs, all of that. And when he did prevail, he offered me the job as his legislative aide. And so that was in May of 2011. And I said, yeah, that sounds great. This seems much more interesting than selling insurance.
Sure.
As a worst case scenario, it's a great networking. I'll meet some cool people. It'll be a great start to a career. And what I found was that I absolutely fell in love with the governing side of it. What I originally liked was the campaign side. It was competitive. It was kind of you're strategizing, you're sitting down saying, how are we going to outmaneuver the opponent? What are we going to say on this issue? What are we going to say on that issue? And then you get in, and all of a sudden now you're governing. And as a Republican, we didn't really have a misperception that we were going to come in and change the world, but you're still in the room. And I'll never forget, Peter and I this is kind of a funny memory. We got invited to a legislative briefing at UMass. And so this was early in our time in office. We go in, and in comes the CEO and, all the state reps and legislators. And we walked out afterwards like, we were in that room. That's kind of cool. Like, we're in the room with people making really high level decisions. And decisions that have a tremendous impact on a lot of people and a lot of lives. And being part of that conversation, I just fell in love with being part of, the group that's put themselves out there to try and make things better for people. And then being part of the community as well, being able to, help bring money to a Head Start facility or to a elementary school or a senior center, and being someone who's got the ability to make a call and try and get some, whether it's financial or legislative or bureaucratic, get some relief for people, and being able to be a resource. I fell in love with that as Peter's aide. So any legislator will tell you they're only as good as their staff, and the staff, there's no better on-the-job training than being a legislative aide, because oftentimes you pinch hit in public events and you're sitting in on a lot of the same meetings. And so 3 years down the road, I had been working for Peter for 3 years. In that time, I had moved to Webster, and the state rep at the time was a man named Ryan Fatman, who ended up running for Senate. And I said, I've been doing this job for 3 years. I'm going to throw my name in the ring. And it ended up, it was an open seat because he had left his rep seat to run for Senate. And so there was a 3-way primary on the Republican and the Democrat side. So it was a 6-way race. And I was fortunate enough to prevail back in 2014. And I've been privileged to hold the seat since.
It's funny you mentioned that from a staff standpoint, because I agree with you, having been a staffer myself, especially when it's one of the most productive or efficient ways to sort of keep tabs on what's happening locally, because you're the one answering the phone call and the constituent services. And I think just through that exercise, you get a really good pulse on what people are calling about, what people are hearing about. And I always said, in the various roles that I had in the State House, working for Senator Moore especially, I started off doing constituent services. And it just, senators get a bit more staff than members of the House. And so we had various roles in our office, whereas I think, a lot of members on the House side have 1 or 2 staff members that really serve a local purpose, especially. And then as you might become a committee chair, you might get some researchers and things like that. But we had constituent services, press secretary, we had a general counsel, a legislative director, a schedulist. We had a sort of a good cohort of a team. But I started out doing constituent services, and that really helped me learn that district. What Douglas cares about, what Webster cares about. They're not the same things all the time. And then you get to meet the local officials too, the boards of selectmen, the school committee members, the school superintendents, and you sort of get a good feel for them. But I think one thing that we think about sometimes, and I think we're all kind of guilty of this, we can sort of anonymize our public officials. We can... You are sort of a figure or a character in a lot of ways and you can sort of take on the shape of national politics, or just you voted no on something I wanted you to vote yes on. So now you're my enemy.
Yeah.
How have you found that experience to be, or sort of translate from the one who was sort of keeping tabs and a pulse for then Representative Durant to the person that's now someone's doing that for you, and you're no longer the behind the scenes guy. You're on the ballot. You took the courageous step to declare your candidacy. So how has that transition been for you?
So far, it's been good. So far, 10 years in, it's been good. And
good point. Yeah.
I always put it this way, that being a rep or a senator, you can make the job as demanding, or you can kind of craft the job to be what you want it to be, depending on what you put into it. And I always say, as a rep, I'm able to duck a lot of the national stuff and instead be really ingrained in the local community. I don't have to necessarily get involved in the federal bickering between the House and the Senate. And I've got 5 towns in my district. I got all of Webster, Douglas, Sutton, and then half of Oxford and a piece of Uxbridge. So it's small enough that I can have a direct personal relationship with a lot of the members of the boards of selectmen and the town managers, the police chiefs and the fire chiefs. And so I can break down that representative title, and I can just be Joe. And so, I'm able to develop that relationship. As you kind of climb the ladder politically, you don't have the ability to be as present in any given community. For example, the Senate district I'm in now has 17 towns, and it takes you an hour and 40 minutes to get from Munson on one side to Blackstone on the other. And so just it becomes logistically impossible to develop that sort of relationship and connection to each individual community within that district. And so I consider myself kind of in the political world, maybe a Hallmark Channel celebrity, not like a HBO celebrity. You know, I get recognized around town occasionally and at the grocery store and whatnot, but I'm not on Fox News. I'm not a talking head. I'm not this, glamorous political figure that people think is untouchable. So to me, I've been able to balance that really well of still having the public persona and job, but also not losing my identity and just being Joe and just being, a regular guy.
Yeah. Well, maybe after this episode, who knows, it might be a skyrocket, to the fame, but it's interesting that you sort of like thinking through the logistics of being a Republican state representative from this region, and I think, as a political observer myself, this area has certainly started to lean more conservative, and you saw it in, I think, a series of elections. It's sort of been a gradual shift that I think now is pretty well solidified. But we're still in Massachusetts, right? So it's still an overwhelmingly Democratic state. But you've been effective and productive as far as, and I think we sort of judge effectiveness based on, or productivity based on sort of the resources gained or garnered. And that's not always true. I think, I have the luxury of that perspective based on my own service, but that is one mark, that is one grade. But all the other elements too, I think, are responsiveness and attendance. And I think, again, you check those boxes as far as I've had the, I guess, luxury of not having to bug you too often. I used to say when I worked in the Senate that keep in mind, people don't call our office just to say hi or to say thank you. That we're typically the last call that they want to make. We're like, they've already made all the other calls by the time that they're calling their senator or representative. But nonetheless, I think you have a good reputation for responsiveness. And again, I think also that the productivity on Beacon Hill as far as bringing home the bacon, so to speak. So one thing that's interesting to me is, how do you navigate that? Because here in your district, you are a sort of a known entity, known quantity, but you align very well politically with your constituents, which is obviously helpful for your political fate. But then you get to Beacon Hill and you're in the minority.
Yeah.
There's a sort of a juxtaposition to that where this is a safe seat, by and large, you've got to do your job and you do. But then you get to Beacon Hill and it's sort of, you're not,
It's really interesting. And so looking at it from a political spectrum, the district I serve is like one of the top 2 or 3 most conservative representative districts in the whole state. So, as a Republican, as you said, it's a safe seat for me as long as I, don't give voters a reason to fire me. And then interestingly enough, I've been to a number of different conferences and forums, conservative-leaning forums outside of the state down in D.C. And I previously was very involved with the Massachusetts Federation of Young Republicans and went on a number of conferences around the country with them and talking to colleagues from different part of the countries who are, deep red Republican.
Sure.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's a different breed of Republicanism than even I have. And I consider myself, we have 25 Republicans in the House. I'm probably, if you had to rank them 1 to 25, I'm, somewhere 17, 18, 19 more conservative. I'm certainly on the more conservative spectrum, but at the end of the day, I consider myself a pragmatist first. And, I think that there's a balance between a legislator who wants to get elected and govern and be effective, as you talked about, and one who gets elected and wants to use the seat as a soapbox to push a political agenda. And we all know those political people, certainly in DC, but we've got them in Massachusetts as well. There are some reps on both sides of the aisle, Dem and Republican, who would rather, get on the news and say something that's going to get a headline, say something that's going to get a bunch of Twitter likes and, intentionally or not, be controversial and throw out a really inflammatory comment, and they're going to use that to amplify their voice or their perspective. The result of that, though, is that you lose a little bit of your working relationship within the building with leadership, with the committees on Ways and Means, the Committee on Judiciary, and the people that you need to ultimately usher through your legislation. So I'm not saying that there's anything right or wrong about either approach. I just choose to value maintaining a working relationship and vote my conscience and vote conservative and support conservative ideals, but not do so in a way that's, self-serving and grandstanding, but do so in a way that is not objectionable. And a great example of that is my district is very, very strong in the Second Amendment, big Second Amendment district. And I was fortunate enough to be appointed the ranking minority member on the Judiciary Committee. And last session, a very substantial gun bill went through the Judiciary Committee. And when a House bill and a Senate bill get passed, they often conflict, and so they get compromised. And 3 members of the House, 3 members of the Senate negotiate that. I know you know this, but for the edification of the listeners, you've got a conference committee between three members of the House, 3 members of the Senate, 1 Republican from each chamber. I was fortunate to be the Republican House negotiator. And again, this was very, very high profile. I had hundreds and hundreds of emails.
I can only imagine.
How dare you, pass this gun law? And I could have used
there were lawn signs throughout your district.
Yes,
I remember
4420. Lawn signs all over. They're still up.
Yep.
And again, I could have used that opportunity to grandstand and make a big hullabaloo and make noise, but I chose to try and impact the bill in whatever little way I could as the token Republican opposed to the initiative. And the lead negotiator on the Dem side in the House was Mike Day from Stoneham, who I have a fantastic relationship with. And so we were able to, we had some fun as, rivalry wise, throwing barbs at each other in the conference committee. But at the end of the day, we both respected each other, respected the points of view. I made it known I didn't agree with just about anything in the bill, but there wasn't this, anger or vitriol that was part of it. And so had I gone in and tried to get on Fox News and tried to raise a bunch of money on the issue, I don't think I would have been. I easily
you absolutely could have. Yeah, that's the thing.
Should have in some regards, but in any case, I don't know that my opinion would have been valued by the conferees had I chosen that course.
Yeah, that's right.
But by maintaining the professional respect, we were able to have that good conversation.
I think that's a good point, especially for folks that are learning about sort of the conference committee process and the lawmaking process. The Democrats in Massachusetts have such a strong hold on a supermajority. And also, I think this is just the way that the conference committees are set up. They didn't need your vote. They didn't need your participation. That bill could have passed and would have passed without any participation from either you as the Republican designee on behalf of all House Republicans and the Senate designee on behalf of all Senate Republicans. You only need 4 signatures. And it's
actually relatively common for the lead negotiator of the House and the lead negotiator of the Senate to sit down privately without even other Democrat members and just hash it out and then tell the other 4 members of the conference committee, hey, this is the compromise bill. We're going to need you to sign the jacket. So, absolutely, they do not need me in any way, shape, or form. But that is not how this conference committee worked. They included me every step of the way. And, that was a good thing.
And I think that's probably, though, I would never say probably, I think I'm certain it's because of your approach that you took. Because if you had chosen to be more bombastic and more, dramatic in your opposition to it, then there would be no reason to even entertain a discussion. And that's not to suggest that you get, like you said, you didn't get everything you wanted. It certainly wasn't a perfect bill. I think full disclosure, my brother for a number of years was teaching gun safety courses, and based on so just apologies for the listeners that we're doing a bit of a tangent here, but one of the new elements of that bill, now that you brought it up, is that it requires live shooting as an element of getting your LTC, and that it's such a high bar, high threshold, but also there's not a lot of places in Massachusetts to actually do that. That add that as a...
Especially as you move west to 495 or east to 495 rather. The
Absolutely.
further towards Boston you get, the less access you have to the ability to do a range and have live fire.
But as that requiring that now as an element, it essentially makes that course far more restrictive, far less accessible, but also potentially far more expensive. And that's just for someone to lawfully possess a firearm. When in reality, the sort of the issues that we are confronting with gun safety and gun crime, as a default or by default, they're already law-breaking citizens or residents. And I think that's the challenge, is you made it, you putting more laws on the books to make people follow that have already sort of shown a tendency to not follow the law. And so there's just sort of a I don't know how to describe it as far as like, it's just sort of, it seems odd to me, but this isn't a gun podcast by any means. I think it's really good insight. And you mentioned too that that's your take on Beacon Hill, and we're recording this in the sort of the time and space as far as we're seeing a lot of the confirmation hearings occurring on Capitol Hill this week and sort of this month as the new Trump administration comes in. And a lot of this is performative to me. It's very predictable. It's you sort of, the Democrats line up their questions and, they're bringing up old tweets. And did you say this on a podcast? Did you say this on the news? And did you have this position? But all of this, we're sort of going through the motions, it feels. And it sort of bothers me in some ways that's what our political system has become. And to your earlier point, a lot of it is performative. A lot of it is, we've sort of climbed the political ladder just to give myself a bigger soapbox with a bigger opportunity to go on Fox News or go on MSNBC and fundraise off of it. And the shame of that is that there's some really legitimate issues that I think we could really dig into. And I would love to see more. And one of the people that I've sort of come to at least be impressed by is someone like a John Fetterman out of Pennsylvania, who it was news that he took a meeting with a Republican nominee for a cabinet position. And that was somehow like, how could he? In reality, it's like, this person's a nominee to be a member of the cabinet.
Yeah, as if just
I should meet with
having
them?
a meeting is an endorsement of some sort.
Yeah. And also like how are you otherwise going to get answers to questions if you don't actually sit with the individual and ask them a question? It's disappointing that's sort of become our political reality.
I always felt the same way whenever in his first term, Donald Trump, like him or hate him, he had a meeting with Vladimir Putin and had the audacity to shake the man's hand and was crushed.
A lot of nerve.
I'm like, well, that's the guy who's sitting across the table from me. So we're going to have the conversation. And,
right.
There were people saying, well, by having the conversation, you legitimize him. Well, he's legitimate whether I want him to be or not. So do you want us to try and have a peaceful resolution or not? Do you want us to sit and have a conversation or not? And the term that I like to use, and I think it was Jonathan Haidt, who's a social psychologist, who put this in my head, is that politics has become a spectator sport. Mm-hmm. If you think back a couple generations, people related to politics. They went out and they held signs and they had a direct impact on political outcome. Now it's my team versus your team. And, the rise of cable news and social media
mm-hmm.
has made it a spectator sport where, there was the whole not my president movement. Well, I got news. He's the president for the entire country.
Exactly.
He is your president. You may not have voted, but he's your president. And so by saying not my president and by celebrating failure, like that's just un-American. And so, the devolution of politics into spectator sport has not been healthy. And it leads to what you were talking about, where everything's kind of preordained and scripted and more about the spectacle than it is about trying to get to resolution.
And it's interesting to me. I think that phenomenon has sort of like trickled down into like the scoring that political point also gets you sort of endorsements, the closer to the citizen that you get, where that, let's use that not my president example. It's on the way out the door, a lot of people that were in supportive or sort of, I guess, in the camp of now President, then former President Trump, where, Joe Biden is not a real president or he's not the actual president. And if you just took to Twitter and if you just tweeted that, the amount of likes and retweets that you would get by the people that you follow and the people that you sort of subscribe to, it's sort of, it's like throwing red meat into the middle of a barn. Yeah. And the adrenaline rush you must get from that of, look at all these people agreeing with me. But in reality, he, like to your point, he was, and he at the time is the president. He now was the president. The same thing with like Obama. He's not my president. It's like, no, he is. But I feel like we've retreated to our respective corners, and we just sort of yell into this echo chamber where we get that rush of like, like the thrill of it, when the actual challenge is someone living literally right next door to me might have a completely opposite opinion, and I don't even talk to that person. I don't even but they have more impact on my life. They have more significance in my life. Yeah. And I feel like we've sort of gone in, like, we live in our homes and sort of that's our bubble. And now the internet turns into like a simulated world that we can live in. The internet
and social media is wild, because you could put together a really thoughtful, articulated argument in favor of anybody and why they should be the nominee. And maybe you get like 5 or 10 likes. And then I can post a picture of my dog taking a leak on a lawn sign of a political opponent that I don't like, and it's going to get 250 likes within 10 minutes.
That's right.
It's like, where's the more substantial content and thought-provoking content here? My well thought out articulation of a point of view, or a funny picture of my dog peeing on a Joe Biden sign or a Donald Trump sign. And it's the way that the algorithms work. You're
That's right.
Simply just reinforcing a previously held belief with people that you know agree with you because it feels good. And isn't it good to see how many people agree with me? I must be right, and all those other people must be wrong because I don't hear from them. And well, you don't hear from them because you don't like their content, and you don't take the time to read into any legitimate source of material. And it's just, it's not a healthy way to have a dialogue.
And I'll give you an example too. There's a couple that just come to mind that are sort of fresh for me, or at least local to me. And it reminds me that oftentimes the truth is nuanced, or the facts are nuanced. And your example of, I could give you a 10-paragraph essay about why I think my idea is the right one. And if you just took the picture and tweeted it out, you're going to get far more engagement than I ever could, because even the headline is boring. The picture is engaging. I can see it, it, and move on and scroll past it. But I think that the truth is a good example where, and I just sort of reflecting back to the election cycle of 2014, this was at the sort of the dawn of casino gaming in Massachusetts. And my boss at the time, I think, had a very nuanced approach to gaming, which was generally for it, didn't love the idea, didn't love the reliance on the tax revenue, that it was sort of a sin tax, so to speak. But the town of Milford at least had a fighting chance for a casino potentially. And so the local officials in Milford said, we'd love to at least be able to pursue this. And so at the time, the rest of the district was sort of agnostic. It was one of those things of, frankly, Foxwoods and Mohegan are probably even more, still closer to us than Everett and maybe the Springfield. So our residents were really, it didn't seem like a really contentious local issue necessarily. And so because Milford was really curious, we thought, well, we can certainly be for gaming generally, so long as Milford has their chance. And also so that Milford has the chance to vote on it, yes or no, pro or con. And the value or the utility of that for us was, then let's make sure that that's preserved in the bill. And so the Senate bill, I might get sort of the sequence wrong here, but the Senate bill came out and said that you had to have a host community agreement and a surrounding community agreement. And so the idea was that the impact of a resort-style casino is going to bleed well beyond a town's borders. And so a town like a Hopkinton or, wherever, or Mendon or a Hopedale would certainly have a say in whether or not Milford had a casino. The question was, could they have veto power over it?
Yeah.
Could the surrounding community stop the proposal? And so our thought was, yes and no. They should at least have like a reasonableness standard where it can't just be like a extortion where you want to go forward, we want everything that we're asking for.
Hey, give me a new elementary school.
Exactly. And so if Milford's agreeable and sort of and by all means, the host community should have veto power. That was sort of the crux for us. Well, the Senate bill, as it came out, said the surrounding communities actually had veto power. So my boss at the time gets up on the Senate floor and says, so we plan on legalizing casino gaming. We just don't plan on building any casinos. So that's what we're going to achieve here. So we voted no on the bill. Well, then the final bill, to your point on conference committees, all those things get hashed out and negotiated in a conference committee. That surrounding community provision is modified such that if they can't come to terms, the then regulating entity, the Gaming Commission, could actually step in and impose terms. They could basically serve as mediator and say, this is what you get. And so that was basically to our satisfaction. Okay, now Milford has a fighting chance. The surrounding communities get a chance to negotiate in good faith. If they can't reach a compromise, then the Gaming Commission can step in and provide at least a fair outcome. And of course, that can all be subject to lawsuit, all those sorts of things. And so we vote yes. When I say we, my boss votes yes. Well, as he's running for office, he's a flip-flopper now.
Yeah, you were against it before you're for it, which is...
And that's the thing. So that exact accusation is really easy to just sort of levy and say, you're a flip-flopper, you were against it. The explanation is, well, hold on, wait a minute. What actually occurred was already, like, I'm sleeping. You lost me. And I think part of this, like, politics has become the salesmanship and the sort of the headline. And so it frankly, politics has kind of adapted to that digital age really well, where that sells.
Yeah.
The performative aspect is really attractive and appealing to some people.
And on that point, to go back to the campaign side of things, the strategy side of things, we would always talk about, if you're explaining, it's too late.
That's exactly right.
Like, even if there's an unfounded, wild allegation against you, if you're explaining, it's too late, because that means that someone's asked you about it. Someone believes the allegation.
That's right.
If someone believes you're a flip-flopper or whatever, and they don't have the time or the energy to digest the nuance. So you better be pretty clear and pretty concise from the get-go.
And so I think that's absolutely right. And I'm thinking about sort of the impact on, I've been in the public eye a bit, certainly the last few years, as far as my role. You've lived it as an elected official. That sort of the nuance of having to explain yourself publicly, having to defend yourself publicly, that's stressful. Certainly it has been on me as an individual. I'm sure the same is true for you, but that bleeds into your families as well. And so I'd love to sort of pivot and maybe chat a little bit about, congratulations, you're a dad several times over, and most recently had your third. So congratulations to you and your wife and your family on having a healthy family, and certainly wish that to continue. It's, how do you, I think, balance both the commitment that you have as a dad and as a husband, and but also how do they navigate sort of that public eye? Or, I think your kids are young enough now where they're not reading too much about dad in the newspaper, but that day's going to come. And sort of how do you balance your roles as elected public official and dad and husband and family member?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first and most important is having a supportive spouse, having a supportive wife, and she's been fantastic. Now, we did get married after I was already sworn in, so she's never seen a campaign, because I've been lucky enough to run unopposed the past.
And she knew what she was getting into, though, as a result.
Well, she knew what she was getting into in the public sector of being elected. She's never seen the campaign, and that's a whole different side of things, because that's when the negativity and the personal impacts really come out. And so hopefully I'm fortunate enough not to ever get into that sort of a situation. But, we don't agree on all the issues, but we have a great dialogue, have a great communication, and she understands my perspectives and is willing to, support me moving forward with that. And the other thing, I always say family first. For me in my professional career, my family is going to come first. I've got 3 kids under the age of 4, and I want to be there. I want to be there as much as I can. And, if that means that I miss a couple of events, I try not to, but sometimes that's the sacrifice that it takes. The biggest thing is being honest with people in the district and not promising I'm going to be somewhere and then not, and trying to, pick and choose what events I might be able to skip out on, or not skip out on, so to speak, but what events are absolutely critical for me to be at, and what events I can say, hey, look, my kid's sick with the flu right now. I'm just not going to make it. And for the most part, people have been really supportive of that. So, and again, Ashley's there to pick up the slack. If I need to be out on a night or a weekend because it's something that's simply beyond my control, she's always been there to help me do that. And that's, without that, I don't think it'd be possible.
I had one of the commissioners at the Cannabis Control Commission that I used to work for told me when my daughter was born, it's one is sort of a one-on-one, you know, both parents can sort of juggle it. 2 is a man-to-man defense. 3, now you're playing zone. And so I think, you know, certainly kudos to you and your wife for playing a solid zone defense and juggling quite a bit.
We'll see how the next 6 months go, because my daughter, the youngest, is 8 months old. So she's right at the end of her pet rock stage where you can put her down and she doesn't move.
Yeah.
And it's funny, Steven, my oldest, he's hanging out on the map behind me.
I noticed him, yeah.
He's your very stereotypical first child. He's a strict rule follower. He likes things in order. He's easy to coerce into compliance with a little bit of friendly bribery and, you know, all that. And then my middle child, Jameson, wants to burn it all down to the ground, as the typical middle child does. So
that checks
it's
out.
A lot of fun.
I'm one of 3. I'm the youngest, and that does check out with our dynamics in our household as well. So I'm one of 3 boys as well. So I think, you know, I'm not familiar with the Pope, but, you know, bestowing sainthood is certainly eligible. A lot of mothers are eligible, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
But it's funny because I think my daughter is 18, going to be 19 months pretty soon, and we've reached the phase of tantrums, and the bribes are becoming very real, where pudding is now ice cream as far as she's concerned. I'm okay with that. And like, go nuts. And I can relate to a degree, and we're living it here in our household as well.
Yeah. The other great thing for me about being a state rep, as I said earlier, is it kind of is and can be the job that you make it. And so, you know, I try and be very, very discretionary about when I do, but I can bring my kids to some events. You know, I did a ribbon cutting at a mountain bike ride, and, you know, you're out in the woods wearing jeans and a sweatshirt. So I brought my oldest kid, and he thought it was the greatest thing in the world to go to an event where there's 1,000 people riding mountain bikes through the woods of West Hill Dam. Now, I'm not going to bring them to a committee hearing on Beacon Hill, but, you know, when appropriate, it's great to be able to bring them out, and, you know, they get to see Dad give a little speech and cut a ribbon. And so then when I do have to say, you know, when they're sitting down to dinner and I say, Dad's got to go to work, I've got a nighttime meeting, Steven's like, oh, are you going to ride bikes? And, you know, what are you doing today? And he's starting to understand a little bit. And so that's really kind of a privilege to be able to incorporate him where appropriate into the workday.
Well, it's funny you mention that, because outside of, say, the Constitution, there really is no job description for state representative. And so...
It's funny with the 3 kids, I got asked all the time, like, what do you have for paternity leave? I'm like, I make it. I choose my own. Like, the town meeting in Sutton is not going to be postponed because Representative McKenna had a kid. Like, events in the world are going to go on. And so it's whether or not I'm able to balance it. Now, going into Boston and voting on a piece of legislation, there are some privileges, paternity, maternity privileges allowed for, say, a remote voting. So in that regards, okay, sure, you've got a little bit of a paternity leave, but like, my job never stops. With my oldest kid, he was born the Saturday before budget debate. And luckily, I'll say this is one of the few times that I consider it lucky, it was in the middle of COVID, so everything was remote. So our budget debate, the House budget debate, was remote. So I was able to participate fully in the House budget debate via remote voting from the hospital room right after my son was born. So, you know, it's a balance.
Well, and if you think about it, our Constitution is older, Massachusetts Constitution, older than the U.S. Constitution, and generally the same authors. And it's amazing how little we've adapted since, and how much we've adapted since, where, you know, that certainly wasn't contemplated by our founding fathers, so to speak. And a lot of the job is still very, not ceremonial, but sort of a relic of that period where there is still debate. There is still, and I think what we've seen in recent years, though, and there's obviously plenty of news coverage about sort of the a lack of transparency around the legislature and the legislative process, and the sort of the cloak and the smoke-filled rooms, that sort of thing. But all the same, we have the luxury of being in a digital age and having that degree of accessibility to our elected officials, where in the past, I may not even know who you are, never mind know you and be able to contact you. How do you think that's adapted in sort of recent years, where do you find that constituents have an easy time getting in touch with you, or that you have an easy time getting news to them? Like, how have you embraced both the digital availability and opportunity, and how has it presented maybe an advantage to you, but also like you are now expected to be everywhere, and sort of in an indirect way able to be places, but again, that's got to be sort of a push and pull on your time, but also your I don't know, I'm trying to think like your the stress and sort of the anxiety that having that responsibility must bring.
Yeah, I would say that's probably my biggest flaw as a rep, as an elected official, is that I don't utilize the tools available to communicate outward. I don't push out very much content about what I'm doing. And I look at some colleagues who have very high level, very professional communications and social media presence, and they're putting together videos and blurbs, and it all looks great. And maybe it's just an excuse of not wanting to do it, but I find social media to be really frustrating. And you'll go, as you alluded to earlier in the conversation, you'll go to a very innocuous post about something seemingly very, very agreeable, and within 2 or 3 comments, it's devolved completely. Nobody's talking about the original subject anymore.
Yeah.
And it's just a shouting match. And I find that I get actually physically anxious if I'm on Twitter or X. And so I don't find it to be a very healthy way to spend my time. So I try not to be very tied up in social media. And the very same reps who are really adept and talented and skilled at putting social media content out there are also really, really hypersensitive about the social media feedback that they get. And I'm like, I don't want to be that way. I don't want to be worried about, my mom's neighbor who put a frowny face on a post that I put on Twitter. Like, I just don't need that in my life. And so I'm fortunate that I'm in a district that I can get away with not having a more profound social media impact. But I would say that's my biggest flaw. With that being said, I do receive a fair number of private messages on Facebook or emails or calls. And I tell everyone, I'll meet you anywhere, whether it's a coffee shop or your house or, wherever you feel comfortable. I would much rather meet you in person and have a conversation. Or if it's just a phone call, fine. I'm happy to do that as well. I'm not going to necessarily get involved in a big back and forth on, a Twitter Messenger or whatever, or Facebook Messenger. But if you want to reach out and have a legitimate conversation, I'm pretty accessible.
Yeah. But I think that there's a compliment in that too, which is that degree of accessibility is uncommon. I certainly, I think that making yourself available, but I think doing it in a civil, productive, but also I think a really thoughtful way of, I'm not looking to just throw more noise into a noise machine, which is social media. And I think you're right about sort of the mental health and stress dynamics of social media, is that the more you engage with it, it definitely brings anxiety, but it's almost that sort of like you need your fix too. And, and that level of engagement is like the back and forth. And I've also found too that if you're willing to engage once, it's sort of like, then you better be willing to go down that rabbit hole, because if you respond to one comment, now you set an expectation. You've also made it apparent that, oh, he reads the comments. So now I know I can sort of get him, or sort of dagger and twist the knife a little bit.
There's absolutely people out there to get you and out there to tweak you intentionally. And, it's crazy.
So I guess just thinking through, like, we've got a couple more minutes here. And thank you again for the generosity of your time.
Yeah, of course.
This is the beginning of session, sort of bill filing deadline is come and gone. What can folks expect from you this session? Are there any priorities that you are working on that you want folks to know about? And then I think as we get closer to close, we can maybe talk about what the future holds for you, and sort of, again, maybe, and we'll put in our show notes as well, how people can in fact get in touch with you. So you don't have to waste your time going through the litany of ways that people can contact you. But this is the beginning of a 2-year legislative session. So congratulations again on being sworn in as our representative, and thank you for your service especially, and also to your staff for their service to us as well. And you do have great staff, and we've been lucky to you've been lucky to have great staff throughout your tenure. But obviously, again, thanks for that. But also, what's on your plate? What's on your agenda? What do you expect for this session?
So this goes back to something we talked about earlier. As a Republican in Massachusetts, I don't have any misperceptions that I'm going to craft any groundbreaking legislation that the Speaker of the House is going to say, holy cow, Rep. McKenna's got a great idea. Let's get that passed right away. And so I filed a number of bills. Many of them I have filed in the past. I don't believe necessarily that any of them are on a fast track to getting done. So I prefer to focus my attention on trying to be present in the community and see what I can do to help the district, help the community, while still voting my conscience. So the other edge of the sword of being a Republican in Massachusetts is that I can vote my conscience completely without any fear of repercussions. We've got 85% of the legislature is Democrat. And so the way that works in the House, especially, I'm a little less familiar with the Senate, but in the House especially, the Speaker of the House rules with an iron fist, and he controls the agenda and the policy very, very tightly. And if you want to be advanced into a preferable committee and get a committee chairmanship, which comes with a healthy pay bump, you better be agreeable to the Speaker and to his agenda. And, maybe that could mean taking some votes that aren't necessarily with your district. As a Republican, I'm never going to get a chairmanship. I'm never going to get that, corner office with a couch and a suite. So I don't have to worry about, voting the way that my district sees fit. And occasionally we'll get asked as legislators, you'll have someone reach out and say, well, didn't you know that this is polling at 60%? How dare you vote against it? And my answer to this, and I've never had someone challenge me back, and I've used it a couple times, is, well, wouldn't you want a politician with a little bit of conviction, a politician who's got conviction of beliefs that, right, sure, I'm willing to be educated, and I'm willing to listen to new facts, and, I'm willing to flip-flop my decision, as you talked about with Senator Moore, and not be ashamed of it if I've become further educated on an issue. But what I'm not willing to do is just look at a poll and say, well, this poll, this particular number this week, so that means that's how I have to vote. And then I've got to, bend my morals or my convictions to fit that. I don't think that's the proper way. And I don't think that's the kind of representative anyone actually wants when they go to the polling location. That's now, right. If you think I'm doing a good job and I don't align with the convictions and the principles of the district, will vote for someone else. But don't tell me that because an issue polled, I need to vote for it. So
that's again, true. These issues, you don't vote. I mean, if we voted based on polling, we wouldn't need a legislature.
Exactly.
And I think if we voted based on polling, that 40% is now completely unrepresented. And I think there's a shame in that. And I also question, frankly, when we do these polls, sometimes we don't give enough information. We don't provide that nuance. We don't provide, like I mentioned, that gaming issue. That's a really technical aspect of a bill, but very critical for my old boss's district. And I think, so what I respect is when a member of the legislature or any governing body, I'll use, given that you're the guest, I'll use the legislature. I have a lot of respect for someone that at least can understand and comprehend the issue and engage with me in a meaningful dialogue. Yeah. You and I don't agree on everything. In fact, I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but full disclosure, I'm a lifelong Democrat. You're a Republican. We agree on more things than we probably disagree on. But when we disagree on things, I respect the fact that I can have a conversation with you about it. I might even be able to persuade you about it. And you, on the opposite side, you might be able to persuade me and bring me along to your line of thinking. At the very end, I respect that you have an opinion and that you have an informed opinion. And I respect if we disagree and you get the votes, congratulations, democracy prevailed. That's how it works. But I think, the idea that, well, it polled 60-40, it's like, well, how big was your sample size? Yeah. What geographic representation is included in that poll? There's so many things that I think you could pick apart that I'm really grateful we don't. Town meetings, by the way, as a form of government, as a New Englander, I'll probably be exiled for this, but I think it's one of the least productive forms of government because they usually the citizenry getting up and voting on whether or not we should get a new fire truck. One, can our budget afford it, and do we need it?
Yeah.
But why? I may not like the fire chief, so I'm voting no. It's like that.
Yeah.
I appreciate the democratic vision of that, but I think in practice it's very outdated. But that's apologies to
people choose to come out, and very few people choose to come out and participate too, which is challenging. Yeah. And so, and with polling, there's some great polls out there, and then there are some really, really bad polls that can ask a question that make you think one thing when the reality is entirely different. And so,
and keep in mind, it's people that respond to polls that make the polls. And if you respond to a poll, that means you've got spare time on your hands, and you answered the phone or you responded to the text message, and you sort of took that bait. I think I've probably been called or texted about a poll dozens and dozens of times. I've never responded to one. And so I can tell you, I'm not included in that 60-40 split. So thank you for not taking that bait or sort of falling victim to that pressure, because I think, and again, I've always known you to be informed. I've always known you to be thoughtful about your approach, and I've never been able to just position you on an issue because of your party registration.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of respect for that.
And like I said, being a Republican in a vastly Democrat state gives me the freedom to vote that conviction, but I always consider myself pragmatist first. And to the conservative who heard the earlier part about me not going all guns a-blazing about the gun bill, no pun intended, but very intended, it's easy to be on the sidelines and get really angry and say, you should be kicking and screaming and yelling, this is that important. But if you're not in the room, then you can't have any impact at all. And if you go in kicking and screaming, you're not going to be part of the room. And so it's just a balance that needs to be struck. And I don't think enough people take the time to understand that.
I think that's right. And I think the other element too is that bill probably could have been a lot worse if not for your level of engagement, your level of thoughtful engagement, pragmatic engagement. And so again, I think a reminder to folks that bill there was a good chance that bill was going to pass with your participation or without it. And I would imagine your participation made it less bad, less objectionable. And also, I think those things that were objectionable are also being tried, and there's some lawsuits that were swirling around it. So, I think you're right. And I'm happy to sort of give you this platform to let folks know that, because politics is definitely one of those public life elements that it can be stressful, it can be daunting, it can certainly weigh on you.
Well, and the irony is there's not many of us Republicans elected in Massachusetts who have not been called rhinos over the years.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Republican in name only, and myself included. And as I said, I'm one of the more conservative members of the legislature, and I'll risk irritating the right flank of the party here to say, there's a reason that there are no litmus test Republicans in the legislature, because you got to have a level of rationality in order to get elected. And the best response I ever heard was from a colleague, Dave Vieira from down the Cape, who, when he got called rhino, we all get called rhinos. He goes, yeah, I'm a Republican in office. And you are not. You can yell and scream and give me all these litmus tests about a true conservative, but you're never going to win an election, and you're never going to be able to impact meaningful change.
That's right. And I think that's the spectrum. And we could certainly, I'd love to have you back at some point and talk more about national politics, because I think that's the shame about our national political system, is that you have to run through a primary first and survive the primary first. And by doing that, it's a race to the farthest end of the spectrum of your party. And so as a result, I would argue a Bill Clinton is not getting elected in the Democratic Party today. Certainly a Mitt Romney is not getting nominated in a Republican Party today. John McCain, certainly not.
Charlie Baker would be a phenomenal candidate for president as a Republican.
I'd agree with that.
He will never stand a chance in a Republican primary in today's climate.
Right. And I would also argue that I think some people ask me all the time of, well, if it's not this person, then who do you think should be president? And my answer is the person I probably think should be president will never run for president, because they would never subject themselves or their family to the amount of scrutiny, the amount of nonsense and shenanigans that our politicians today get subjected to, especially at that stature, where whatever you said or did in college is certainly going to make its way back up. And I went to college, you went to college. I probably said and did some things in college that I wouldn't be proud of today, or that I certainly wouldn't want to come out. At the same time, I was in college.
Yeah.
And so our life is supposed to be a lifelong exercise in learning and adapting and evolving. And so the problem is to hang that out and say, to declare that this is my character based on something I did when I was 17, 18 years old is, I just think it's unfair. And I think it's a disservice to our system of government. Because I think people that should serve won't because of the consequences and the price you pay to serve.
Yeah. Well, you just crushed my dreams of being president, because there's certainly some memories from college that would disqualify me, I think.
Or I would argue that's exactly what qualifies you for office, is that lived experience. So maybe that's a great way to end, which is, what does the future hold for Representative Joe McKenna? What, you've got 2 years ahead of you as our state representative. Certainly hope you continue to serve and wish to serve. But what can we expect from you moving forward?
In the short term, it's continuing to do this job. I still find it incredibly rewarding. I love being part of the communities that I'm lucky enough to serve. And, with a young family, I'm able to make that balance work. And so I'm going to enjoy that time while I can. The interesting thing about politics is a lot of times your natural career ladder is incumbent upon what others do as well. And so it's hard to put a label and say, well, I want to run for Congress because Congressman McGovern's tremendously popular. And I'm not saying I do or don't, but I'm just saying, like,
you heard it here first, folks. That's
Congressman, I'm not running. Don't worry. But yeah, you're naturally dependent on what other people choose to do in their career as well when you make your decisions about what you do. So there's obviously limited control that I have over that. So I'm not worried about what I can't control right now. I'm worried about trying to be the best father I can for my kids, the best husband to my wife, and a damn good representative to the 18th Worcester District.
Well, and I think you're checking all those boxes and succeeding in every one of those. So thank you again. And honestly, thank you for your service, especially. We are lucky to have your service on behalf of both Webster as well as our surrounding area. Like I said earlier, I've gotten to know you through my career. I've always found you to be an approachable and a common sense, a pragmatic person, a decent man, and by all accounts, great father, great husband, great representative. So in that order as well. So thank you again.
I appreciate it.
And so just to close here, again, this is the Homegrown Podcast. Hopefully what you've gathered from our interview today is that there is a possibility to sit down and talk to each other and sort of engage with one another. I think Representative McKenna is the embodiment of that as our representative on Beacon Hill. We are very fortunate to have his service. But as we move forward with this podcast, that's our goal, is to talk with people, get to know you, understand sort of not only what makes you tick, but what brings you to your commitment to service, to your commitment to our community. And obviously our end goal is for the betterment of our community. And so thank you for joining us for our first episode. We hope you enjoyed it. If you didn't, then sorry, my apologies. And we will go forward here and try to bring more guests and more information and more decency and more engagement to our community. So again, thank you to everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.